This is the new Plymouth Cricket. This Chrysler-designed and built subcompact has been proven by several million miles of exhaustive road tests under a wide range of climatic conditions. But let's acquaint you with the vital statistics. Of the car, that is. Wheelbase is 98 inches, overall length 162, front and rear track 51 inches, and Cricket weighs in at just under a ton. The power plant is a 4-cylinder overhead valve water-cooled engine. Displacement is a shade over 91 cubic inches. Horsepower is 70 at 5,200 RPM. The compression ratio is 8-to-1, and this little mill runs like a watch on regular grade gasoline.
Now, hold it. If George seems to be throwing information at you a bit fast, it's because we want to give you all the feature and service information we can in the time available. So hang on to your seats while George and I take turns discussing the anatomy, care, and feeding of a Cricket. Very short push rods are made possible by the camshaft location high in the block. This design contributes to quiet valve train operation. The deep-skirted block with its 5 main bearings is extremely rigid, and the flat mating surface of pan and block provides a good oil seal. Valve faces and valve seats are both ground to a 45-degree angle. No interference or undergrind like our domestic engines. Exhaust and intake valve guides are reamed to the same diameter, but the exhaust valve stems are 1/1000th smaller than intake to provide extra hot engine clearance.
Incidentally, exhaust valve seat inserts are available for service. Adjust the valves in the firing order sequence, engine not running, and you adjust them either completely cold or completely hot. It's very important to re-torque the head bolts and the manifold after new engine run-in and then readjust valve tappets. The pistons are fitted with full floating piston pins. If you ever re-ring one of these engines, don't wipe the protective coating from the new service rings. This special coating is essential to correct break-in of the new rings. The oil pump is a lot like the one used on our 318 engine. Since the pump and distributor drive gear is on the pump shaft, you must re-time the pump gear any time you remove a pump or pull a camshaft. The engine lubrication system has a full-flow oil filter. Engine oil and filter must be changed every 5,000 miles or every 6 months.
On the subject of oil, it's normal for a new engine to use some oil until the full chrome rings are completely seated. So caution the owner to have the oil level checked every time he stops for gas. Now for the cooling system. The ball-bearing water pump is serviced only as a complete assembly. Whenever you replace or reinstall a water pump, be sure and use the correct new gasket to ensure the right clearance between the pump impeller and the timing case. Another thing, if you drain the coolant, drain the block completely. If the block is partially drained so the pump seal is part wet and part dry, it will ruin the seal and cause it to leak. A 2-stage thermostat is used. When the engine is cold, the upper valve closes off flow to the radiator, and the lower valve is open, allowing circulation through the heater hoses. If the heater is turned off, flow is through the bypass between heater inlet and outlet hoses. When the engine warms up, the upper thermostat valve opens, allowing coolant to circulate through the radiator. The lower valve also remains open to provide coolant flow through the heater hoses. Under severely hot operating conditions, the upper valve opens all the way, and the lower valve shuts off flow to the heater. Full flow through the radiator core ensures maximum cooling when needed. Anything you want to add, George?
Just one caution, Tech. If for any reason you don't have the correct replacement thermostat, don't use a substitute. It's better to run without than to use the wrong kind. The ignition distributor has automatic vacuum and centrifugal advance. When replacing ignition points, be sure and install the insulating washers correctly, or you'll ground out the primary circuit. Point gap is 15 thousandths. Dwell is 60 to 63 degrees. The spark plug should be cleaned, center electrode dressed flat, and gap readjusted to 25 thousandths every 5,000 miles to ensure good engine performance. The charging system consists of a 3-phase alternator having a built-in regulator. 6 diodes are used to rectify the output current, and 3 additional diodes rectify a portion of the current so that it can be used for self-excitation of the field.
And that brings us to the carburetor. The carburetor is called a constant depression type, but that doesn't mean it has anything to do with hard times. Here's what you'll find inside this little gem. A needle suspended in a fixed jet controls fuel flow requirements for all speeds from idle to full throttle. It works something like a metering rod. A piston-type air valve controls air flow, and the throttle valve controls mixture flow. As the throttle valve is opened, both the air valve and the fuel needle are pulled upward. This automatically lets more air and more fuel flow in the correct ratio for the amount of throttle opening. A detailed explanation of exactly how the carburetor works is a bit more than we can cover in this film. So read the details in the reference book and service manual. However, George will try and clear up some of the more obvious questions you probably have at this point.
The air valve is attached to a diaphragm. The space above the diaphragm is called a depression chamber. Through a system of passages, the throttle valve controls the vacuum or low pressure applied to the upper side of the diaphragm and the air pressure applied to its underside. As a result, the diaphragm, air valve, and fuel needle are balanced or suspended between vacuum on the one side and air pressure on the other. The entire assembly sort of floats on air to maintain the correct air-fuel ratio. To prevent surging, a small piston operating in an oil-filled cylinder works something like a shock absorber or damper to ensure smooth operation of the air valve when the throttle is opened quickly.
Enrichment for starting is provided by a disc valve. Metering holes of the valve control the flow of fuel from the float chamber to the mixing chamber. But that's all the time we have for engine, so let's tackle suspension highlights. The upper part of the front suspension consists of a coil spring and a strut assembly. The lower end of the strut is attached to the steering knuckle. A ball joint is used to attach the steering knuckle assembly to the lower control arm. With this suspension, there is no upper control arm, and there are no caster, camber, or steering axis adjustments. The only adjustment provided is for toe.
This cutaway view of the strut assembly shows the built-in shock absorber. Service parts are available for rebuilding the shock absorber. However, if you rebuild one shock, you may have to refill the other with the same type and viscosity oil so that control will be the same on both sides of the car. The rack and pinion type steering gear provides excellent control and easy steering. There are only 2 adjustments: the rack damper shims and the pinion bearing preload shims. Toe is adjusted with the rack centered so that turning radius will be the same in both directions. The intermediate shaft is sharply angled so collision impact is not transmitted to the car interior. The rear suspension is the trailing link type. The upper links are angled so they function as stabilizer links. The lower links handle the drive and the braking forces. The shock absorbers are direct acting and C-leg mounted. Do not drive the car with the shock absorbers disconnected. If you hit a bump with the shock disconnected, the coil spring will pop out of its seat. The handbrake rod operates the automatic adjusters of the drum-type rear brakes. Be sure the owner understands he must apply the handbrake periodically to maintain brake adjustment. At the front of the car, the disc brakes are the 2-piston fixed caliper type. Before you tackle a job on these brakes, be sure and read the instructions in your service manual. The tandem master cylinder has a transparent reservoir, so you don't have to take anything off to check fluid level. As you probably know, vacuum-operated power brakes are standard. The fully synchronized 4-speed manual transmission is also standard. The 3-speed automatic transmission with console shift is optional.
We've given you an imperial gallon of cricket highlights in a pint-sized package. So, rethread the film and take a second silent look at all the features we've been talking about. Read all the labels and captions. Take your own sweet time in studying each picture, and you'll find that you've learned a lot about cricket.